I can't see out of these glasses anymore, so I'm going to take them off. I left them in my car, unprotected, and the non-glare stuff on them is peeling off. Now, I'm at that age where my near sight is really very good, and I can't see the rest of you, so that's fine. I have this timed. I think I'll have you out of here in 25 minutes. I don't know how many poems I'm going to read. I think it was 9, but 3 of them are part of one poem, and 2 of them are versions of each other, so I can't tell you, but I'll give you a clue. Of course, I want to thank Leah and Adam and Gwen and the remarkable staff. They're amazing. The incomparable Alicia Stallings, who is, in my humble opinion, a genius of our time, and our wonderful class. So they've been great. They've really been nice to each other when we have not been so nice. But there are some names I want to mention. I'm going to mention these names, and I'm going to tell you why I'm mentioning them. Leah Stewart, Matt O'Keefe, Nate Marshall, Malcolm Friend, Kyoko Reedy, Pallavi Warkarkar, Danny Perez, and Professor Amy Jarman. We're all from Vanderbilt. So I think that's a pretty good turnout. So I'm going to begin with, I'm reading poems from my new book, which will be out in the next year, or maybe the year after that. It's called Xeno's Eternity, and I'll talk a little bit about the title. But the first poem is set in December 2016 with Marcus Aurelius in Los Angeles. I have taken a seat in a garden of open sky, hedged with ficus and bougainvillea, the bristling red flowers of bottlebrush, and a couple of lemon and lime trees from one of many forgotten orchards. The December sunlight, mellow and gaudy, leaning west, is slanting in like truth, pushing the winter chill into the shadows. And the truth is, I am sitting nearly paralyzed in an aftermath of despair, having returned to the place I think of as home, and expecting the end of the world, my life, our country's life, as I scratch words into the notebook on my lap, where I also balance the book you called To Myself. I am here, Marcus Aurelius, with your thoughts, each as stony as a eucalyptus pod and leafy rubble at the base of a tree too grand for this place. Nature always has an end in view, you wrote. My city is the cosmos, you wrote. A mile or so away, a famous boardwalk skirts the gray Pacific, and ragged souls there find a way to eat by selling painted seashells and pebbles. And in the open-air markets, tourists probe racks of T-shirts and hats with palms and clouds. The homeless make their homes on the hard sand, and the languages of the empire ripple past. And even nearer, the same babble of humanity runs along an expensive shopper's street where there is not a single necessary thing for sale. If we accept that one day the sea will cover us, or retreat from us completely, abandoning the earth, and that may be tomorrow or the day after, even as we hear the rumbling surf rise an octave or note an unusual silence in the silence we are used to, who knows what the sea will do to this city like a sea. The garden shadows are crossing the pages of my notebook while your pages remain sunlit. Nature always has an end in view, for us, if not for itself. Our gift is to see that. Our nature is to see and not wholly believe. Marcus Aurelius, philosopher, one of the 5 good emperors of Rome, I won't pretend you were other than a dictator, who squandered his reign in looking after his own soul. A little flesh, a little breath, he wrote, and a reason to rule all that is myself. You lived at the end of a fortunate era, says a historian who loved you, and still urged yourself to rise daily and do the work of a human being, to stop philosophizing about what a good person is and be one. So I'm going to read two poems. One is a revision of the other. I'm not going to tell you which one, but I was inspired to do this by Monica's wonderful lecture on revision. I thought, I've got these two poems. And one of them, they're both title poems from my book, Xeno's Eternity. And one of the things that urged me on to do this was my friend, longtime friend, wonderful reader of poetry and poet, Garrett Hongo, said, when he saw one of them in print, he said, I like the other version better. So I'm going to read them both. The first one is called What Xeno Meant. And Xeno was the pre-Socratic philosopher who made up the paradox of the arrow, which can never reach its destination because algebraically it must go through each point. Xeno meant to describe eternity, the day that never ends or starts, and not the obstacle of space that stops us at each step. That's what I think anyway. Snowflakes stalled in the morning's freezing air, like seed fluff reluctant to drop anchor in the ice. I'm watching that tentative descent, though I'm already motion and counter motion, even as I follow my pen's blue notes and think I'm not doing anything. Not going to get much farther than this, rising and falling atop the swell. And this version refers to the arrow paradox, as it's called. If you were to look it up on Google, you'd find it. Xeno sent his arrow flying endlessly from point to point along its arc to make a point about eternity. Getting there is tricky. That's what I think anyway. Snowflakes stalled in the morning's freezing air like seed fluff, reluctant to drop anchor in the ice. I'm watching that tentative descent, though I'm in motion and counter motion, even as I follow my pen's blue notes and think I'm not doing anything, not going anywhere, much farther than my own flight across the blank momentum of the turning page. Don't tell me which one you prefer. These are, I realized, pandemic lockdown poems. When I look back at the pandemic lockdown, I think of it as like this, but this. It seems to be, it was all that, but then it was like that. And that we were fixed in time in a way, even as time kept moving. Now, the positive way to look at this, and the way I'm hoping to look at it, as when I say Xeno's eternity, is that Xeno's eternity is an eternal present, always this moment. And that, I hope, is what will come across in some of the poems I'm reading for you. However, I'm going to read a poem I'm calling Altarpiece 3 for Dante. I was asked for an anthology to write 3 poems, each of which would reflect one of the books of the Commedia, an infernal poem, a purgatorial poem, a heavenly poem. And so this sent me back. I had not read the Commedia for a long time. I read it all. And I had the uncanny feeling that there were drawbacks to every place. Hell, of course, but purgatory and even paradise. I thought, paradise seems to be kind of an acquired taste. So I have called these 3 poems This Place, The Other Place, and That Place. And what can I say? Yes, there is content in these which is troubling, but there's content in the Commedia which is troubling all the way through, so I'm sorry. This Place. First day of fall, the first real day of fall, and there will be another after that. Firm footing gave the maker of the world to man and woman once they settled down. Almost at once, ground shifted underfoot. This place is not so bad. It's not so bad. We rode here on the eon and the instant, and probabilities are one clairvoyance. Why do we feel so lost among these trees? Don't think about it, but let muscle memory ease the descent. The occasion's gravity appears in green grime under fingernails and scales the damage done by sun to scalp. Where were we? Oh, once upon a time. Gray, drizzling overcast, bright yellow ginkgos, the first day that was purely an autumn day, and in tomorrow's forecast, brilliant sunshine, like a folk tale forestalling ugly death. But we're not going to die tomorrow yet. We'll wait to see the peak of fading color. How honest can it be to remain sane? They only lasted 6 hours in the garden. Medieval scholars believe that's how long Adam and Eve lasted, 6 hours. This is the other place. Down where the murderer and thief, the liar, the ruiner of childhood, the sinner who's a cutthroat from the womb, the banger, bomber, roller out of hangers hang out, it's all a lot more colorful. Up here, the mountainside you have to cling to, monochrome and sheer, too close for comfort, keep you focused on getting on with it. Take envy. Good Lord, it's already painful. Wanting this one's heart, that one's rifle scope, this one's loving viewpoint, that one's book review. Like trying to fill a trophy room with dog dew. With both eyes woven shut, all you can see is the lining of your skull's own nicks and crannies. Apparently, a purging makes you lighter, though I've heard the bitter aftertaste turns down the corners of your mouth forever, and burning off the fat can waste your heart. Wanting to have that boyish, girlish figure, eating and gagging up the dog's dinner will help you let it out and make it better. But in the other place, no one gets better. And that place. At last, up here you can be good. And over there and under, all around, the way you always wanted but forgot. And yet, desire still exists. Not everybody's looking up at God, that water lily in the pond of heaven. Some shimmy and some shine and some cavort, enjoying one another bathed in grace. The argument is amazingly familiar. If nature were allowed to take its course and it was understood, its basic goodness would fit us in the element made for us. If only we would do what we were told, not by our parents, who probably didn't listen, but by our hearts and minds and willing members, as easily as touching a finger to your nose. Some may enjoy more radiance than others, but everybody gets the same sunshine, a portion to the genius of their skill, that one that you were always meant to be, dog-eared or foxed or sun-bleached on a shelf, will bind you, soul and body, to yourself. Like Borges, I think of heaven as a great library, but I also understand what it means to be bound into a book that you cannot escape. So I also attended Nate Marshall's wonderful lecture on the elegy, his craft class on the elegy, and I sneaked in. Wasn't supposed to be there. So I'm going to read 3 elegies from my mother. One is a sonnet, or a blank verse sonnet. One is, I don't know how you call it. It's like a psalm. And one is kind of twisted quatrains. In this poem, I'm with my sisters, and we are visiting Cape Lookout on the Oregon coast, which was a favorite place of my mother. She would have been 91 this month, near Cape Lookout. So we kept looking and found a little space spangled with fog milk, drooping asters, and coiled bending ferns, a sodden enclosure. No path there, but a steep, unfriendly view of water far below and hard, damp beach. Not the place for Mother that we'd hoped to find, but a woven shrine of wetness and hidden grasses. We did find our way down. The waves spread in. We scattered her from a teacup she had saved. And that bower, with its dewy microclimate, for all our stumbling in and stopping there, it may have been like a memory she'd kept and never told anyone of life before us, before any of us. When my father died, he made sure, or we all made sure, that he was completely surrounded by his family, his children, his grandchildren, his wife. We were all there when he went. My mother managed to be completely alone, and that's partly what this poem deals with. This is called the art site, and it reflects the year after life, when you usually erect a stone of memorial, but also the yearly commemoration of the life of the person who is gone, the art site. This was the woman who remembered her childhood. This was the woman with a girl's voice. This was the woman who recoiled from pictures. This was the beauty who hated her pictures. This was the woman who loved dining out with her children. This was the woman her grandchildren knew as a ghost. This was the woman who bore no resemblance to herself. This was the woman who slipped away. We watched as she passed out of sight. This was the woman who gave us no clue. This was the woman who never lost her sense of humor. How could she have held on to laughter and nothing else? This was the woman lost for so long we could hardly remember her. This was the woman our spouses recalled as ebullient, full of laughter, up for anything. This was the woman who for days after she died came back to me in images of her anger. This was the woman whose leave-taking was long and exit abrupt. She was unconscious but listening. She was unresponsive but responded. She lay in the room where the doctor spoke to us. She lay unconscious, unresponsive, preparing her response. She did not wait while we left to make arrangements. She did not wait while we walked out to the front desk. She must have heard, we told ourselves later. She must have decided, we assured ourselves later. This was the woman who lay unconscious and listening. This was the woman who lay in her bed and left. She left before we could return to see her off. She had loved our visits, we believed, and hated saying goodbye. My earliest memory, oh, thank you, but we're not done. There's more trouble. My earliest memory of her is of standing in the doorway of the bathroom and steam poured out around us, and I saw her coming forward, naked, annoyed that I had interrupted her shower. She is there, in a body I have never forgotten, leaning toward me and telling me to go to my room. The body she left us. I must have been 3 or 4. I could see the blank cesarean scar where my sisters and I emerged. 50 years later, dressing her after her surgery, I would see her body again, young and old at once. No change, but difference. On her stone we have written. On her stone we have depicted. We have etched on her stone, engraved on her stone. Unveiled her stone reads. Her dates on her stone are. We have spelled her name. We have agreed that the stone should say. We have agreed to unveil the empty air. This poem is shorter, and it ends with something that I read once that Lotte Lenya said at the end of her life, and so I thought I'd have my mother say it. End of summer. I grew up in Southern California. in surf culture. So I'm going to make a reference here that may seem exclusive, but it is what it is. End of summer seemed impossible. How could there be an end to summer? Boys and girls with blonde sand on our brown necks. When school clamped down in August, we protested, but it's still summer. But it wasn't. The sun's still burning, the waves still breaking. Summer always ended before it ended. It's not as hot this year as other summers, is it? She wrote, as we were leaving one another. Summer. A country like a floating memory, the good place. You can wear upon your skin like a lace of salt, or the name of one you loved, and fall, and spring, and winter, for that matter. At the end, asked which was her favorite season. The woman who'd been born in the height of summer looked at the window where the leaves were turning and answered, all of them. So I'm going to end with a poem that's like a bookend to the first poem that I read. It's based on something we saw when we were staying in Los Angeles a couple of Christmases ago. We like to go back to the town where we grew up. And it was an enormous curtain of ivy hanging down from a freeway overpass. So this is a poem of dystopia and ruin, but I want it to be upbeat. So as I read it, I want you to think of this song. I love the mountains, I love the rolling hills. I love the flowers, I love the daffodils. I love the fireside when all the lights are low. Boom dia da boom dia. How many people sang that in camp? Yeah. Boom dia da boom. So think of that as we go along. Overpass ivy. I love the mountains. I love the rolling hills. I am so grateful to have been here. I love the ivy dangling from the LA overpass. The long ropes of dark leaves hanging still, and the tough old vines embracing the concrete pillars. Shadows gather, layering older shadows, and cars hurry beneath. People look up a moment at the relics, as if Wordsworth's River Wye, and not the dilapidated abbey downstream, were the ruin to be cherished. I cherish the ruins of home. The churches my father built and served, and his father, sold to new businesses, the schoolyards and neighborhood backyards, the congregations of tight-knit communities, all treated as teardowns, purpose-driven deaths to bring forth new spaces, new values for the soul's real estate, new ways of traveling to a different life. America is full of ruins, said Randall Jarrell, the ruins of hopes. But home is a kind of hope, and hope can be restored in memory. Coleridge must have dreamed of the river Otter, winding in amazing motion through his childhood and remade it as the sacred Alf. I saw that one evening in Ottery St. Mary, looking toward the channel. That need to remake already stirs in the swollen urge crossing the Aegean as a bombed street lives again in a bombed heart. We will cross gulfs of space for a new foothold that may allow us time to dream of return in song and story, but never in person. Every memory of home is an origin story. It may be Eden we miss, but also before Eden, that garden yet to be imagined, filled with lives which will make our lives. The strands of overpass ivy hang straight down, slenderer but as heavy as Isambard Kingdom Brunel's massive chain links. The industrial triumph now declining in rusty stillness, the whole earth a broken breathing, St. Stephen pelted with clods of smoke. The weather forecast collapses like a telescope. All that seems so far away now fits in a palm, which we fit inside. The closing and secreting fist of a sea anemone, where the tide pool encrusts its foundations as if a shrine once stood there and now stands again, inverted, its gargoyle barnacles opening tenderlessly in hunger. It is always back to the sea, and now the sea responds, accepting the invitation to rise and cleanse and undermine itself with the poisons it will add to its home brew. It is why we inquire of a knob of rock catching sunlight in the Kuiper Belt if it was from Abyssinia, Alexandria, Anaheim, the moon. If it knew the moon and earth when they were young, if it can speak for a particular comet carrying water like Gunga Din to sprinkle some imperial throat near the heart, cratered but still at work. Ruins always tell us they were a place once, and we dig them up, hurtling at the speed of a brush tip to sip dust from the imprint of a scallop shell. The stranded vines cling to the concrete, a hanging garden of Babylon, colossal wreck, and local antique breakdown, and in the windless traffic below the traffic, and still in the windless motion below the traffic. Perhaps they meant to pull it all down, then saw from another angle the seductive cascade, neither an invitation to nor a caution against going up or coming down, nodding yes or nodding no, and left it for others to notice, witness, and marvel at among the hills of Silver Lake near the ancient reservoir. Boom diada, boom. Thank you.